Good morning, folks. I know we'll have a few other folks joining us throughout, but wanted to welcome you to this first inaugural edition of the Bâton Sâlon. As we promoted it on LinkedIn and website and Twitter, we say it's a modern throwback to the Enlightenment era gatherings that hopefully feature thoughtful conversation, reasoned debate, and the collaborative refinement of ideas. We hope this salon supports you making critical decisions and guiding their organizations. But most importantly, I think we just need an excuse to get together. This is going to be a fun conversation. Hopefully you walk away with a few ideas, but hopefully you're also willing to contribute a few ideas. So summaries of our live podcast will be posted via our website, batonglobal.com, YouTube, and your favorite podcast apps. Podcast approval waiting times are anywhere from 3 hours to 3 weeks. So please stay tuned in Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, wherever you find your podcasts. So with that, let's dive right into things. Today's salon is meant to cover what we describe our job as sometimes, and that's hey Mitchell, hey Kappen, what do you do? Well, I do 50% strategy, 50% therapy, and that's personal therapy, that's professional therapy, that's organizational therapy, that's personal strategy, that's professional strategy, that's organizational strategy. We're going to be talking about how do we play through COVID-19. I think we at Bâton think that this is in many ways our new normal. I've described it to my 12-year-old as, if you sprained your ankle in the third quarter of a game, how do you play through that? How do you make that your new normal and normalize our response to this in such a way that it doesn't make sense necessarily to talk about after this is over in a couple weeks or maybe even a couple months. What we know about pandemics is that there's always second and third waves, and we need to be able to play through that. We're going to talk about what makes an effective crisis response, what it takes to have agile execution. But I think one of the more interesting bits is we'll also talk about self-care. What does it mean to sustain organizational resilience, individual resilience, as we're being asked to do radically different things? We'll always trot out change management models, and one of them that we'll look at today is the psychodynamic approach to change. How do you react to change? How do you go through the cycles of change? And eventually get out on the other side. So we hope to have an interactive, engaging conversation with everyone today. Professor Kappen, you want to say a few words, do the introductions, and then we'll address everyone and welcome everyone formally.
Sure. Thank you, Matthew. I think what Matthew forgot to tell you is it's 50% strategy, 50% therapy, 50% other duties as assigned. But that aside, in our recent conversations, talking to people in Des Moines, in our overseas locations where we have offices, former clients, current clients, a desire to share information and connect has been a theme that we have observed the last two and a half weeks. I think we've been talking about doing a podcast for 5 years. We weren't thinking about doing a live podcast 5 years ago, but it's always been in the back of our mind. We should just sit down and record some of the stuff we say before we get old and forget what it is we used to say. And this moment of social isolation, I think, has been a good spark, and some of our associates in the firm pushed the podcast idea, and we decided now was the time to strike. So with that note, thank you for coming. Many of you on the call, I think, are former students, current and former colleagues. I think I have a former neighbor that might be on the call. So we appreciate the friend and family support for the inaugural Bâton Salon.
And some of you know us, some of you don't. So Professor Kappen, let's go into introductions. I'm going to introduce you, and you introduce me. Okay. The way that to folks that don't know Jeff, I describe him as the smartest guy I know. He speaks 5 languages when he's sober, and yet leaks 3 or 4 more when he's had a beer or 2. So if we really get desperate, we can always, talk about beverages and languages. But Professor Kappen really takes care of all the heavy lifting when it comes to the research aspect. Really brings a sharp mind organizationally, but also globally. Really takes care of all of our organizational behavior elements, understanding how people work in organizations. But beyond that, is probably just the best person to ask a question when you need an answer, because the trust is there, and I sincerely appreciate his willingness to join us today. Kappen?
Geez, how do you follow up that introduction? Thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know Professor Mitchell, who would prefer to go by Matthew 99.8% of the time,
Absolutely.
he describes himself frequently as a pilgrim. And I think when we first started working together, I wasn't really sure what that meant. I knew he'd done the pilgrimage across Spain, so I had that going on. But as we have spent the last 6-7 years working together in various contexts, I think that metaphor aptly describes the thirst for knowledge, the willingness to meet people where they are, plug in on their journeys. I told him last week that I think he gives more than pretty much anyone I know, to the point where I told him to take a day off on purpose. And we are very fortunate to have him leading many of our strategic engagements. Many of you have had leadership, who are here right now, have had leadership classes with him and benefited both from the breadth of his knowledge and the depth of his soul and his willingness to help you out. So I will stop there, and maybe we can get going and stop pushing.
So we've started the therapy early.
Yeah,
we've got
right
the therapy
on.
dog, Molly. I see the therapy dog there for us, which is exciting. So we've got quite a few folks on the call, and I'm gonna probably jump into some of the material, but make sure if you have any questions to go ahead and post them in the chat. Would absolutely be willing to take those questions, and that's something that we expect this to be is very interactive. I think that the Enlightenment era salons are a place where we come together to try to lift each other up, but also to refine our collective ideas. So if you do want to have a question, feel free to put that in there, or even just unmute and jump right in. I think we have plenty of time and space to be able to do that. I will go ahead and get us right into the some of the material. Carter, can you see this screen?
Yes, see it really well.
Fantastic. So this is the way we think about strategy. Some of you have seen this, others maybe not, but we think there's 4 key elements to a successful strategy, and it aligns very well to our title today of strategy and therapy. So first of all, you got to know yourself, and this is both for individually and organizationally. What do you do well? What differentiates your offering? Next is know thy enemy. We say that there's nothing new under the sun. It's just a matter of how it's done. And these are 5,000-year-old ideas from Sun Tzu and others. Know the competitive environment. Know what you are up against. Know what trends are in the market. And frankly, COVID-19 is a fantastic example of something that we should have been able to expect, but probably didn't. Next, think big. What are those big goals? What are the aspirational goals that cause you to sit up a little straighter sometimes, that cause you to be inspired, but also to be just a little bit scared? And then finally, what I think all of us on this call and all of our organizations that we work with have a deep reservoir of an ability to work hard. And so we think with these 4 key elements, that tends to, over time, produce a successful strategy. It produces a culture and a language for individuals and organizations to be able to execute successfully and achieve those goals. But Kappen, as you work through strategy with organizations here and abroad, where do you see them, having the most success? And where do you see some of the pitfalls as they try to go through and execute their strategy?
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls that we run into as we put this up, there are two. One is around an objective self-appraisal. I think when we go in to do strategy, a lot of people know their competition, they know the dynamics of the markets, they know the constraints of government regulation. Everyone seems to level set on that part pretty quickly. They might disagree on priority or which one is the most important. I find where organizations tend to struggle is either on a real objective self-appraisal, and secondly is on within the thinking big box, the ability to embrace change in a meaningful way and think beyond what we're doing now, what we've always done, to what could we do. I was recently with some European clients, and it took me, I kept asking for 15, 20 minutes. Okay, that was 10 years ago. There was some therapy in that session, so personal gripes from 8 years prior came out. We smoothed those over. And then I said, okay, but what's next? What do you want to do? If I gave you a magic wand and you could start over, what does that scenario look like? And I think with the pressures of day to day, and I suspect we may get to this point when we start thinking about the current crisis more explicitly, is what is the big thought and how do you get there and what does that look like? And those seem to be two places where we have to tug on our clients a little bit to get good answers that we can use.
So, I couldn't agree more. This objective self-appraisal, sometimes we have it early on in our careers. And sometimes, I'm going to be very honest, it does tend to fade as we gain experience, the ability to be introspective. And so it does take a community, and maybe that's a good chance to bring in a few other voices. Jackson, I know you're on the call, and hopefully you can hear us and participate as well, but you have strategy in your title. How do you work with your clients to allow them to maintain a healthy understanding of themselves and their ability to execute?
Wow, thank you so much for calling me out at 7:40 in the morning, Dr. Mitchell. That's much appreciated. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something that I have to do every single day, and obviously that the pressure of that has ratcheted up greatly given the current unprecedented and uncertain environment. I think I work for ITA Group based in the Des Moines area, and one of the things that we're most known for is big live events. That is obviously completely disrupted in the current environment. Most of our clients are either postponing or outright canceling for the next, 3, 4, 5 months. And so right now, all of our strategy discussions are helping them figure out how they can take the.
I don't know if anybody's ever seen the episode of. Whoops. Sorry.
How they can take the content that they're trying to get out to the masses, their partners, their customers, even their own employees in some circumstances, and deliver that messaging, that critical messaging that's going to be carried throughout their year out to these critical audiences in an environment that they have relied on for many years. A big live event with keynote speakers and breakout sessions and trainings is a really big deal. And we have clients that are doing multi-million-dollar spends annually with us to help them drive that messaging home, to help them build their own brand with these audiences. And so for us right now, it's how do you allow that message to carry forward strategically in an environment, in that live environment that's immediately been taken away. So it's challenging, and you have to be innovative and collaborative with one another to ensure that those goals and objectives that were tied to a live event can now be replicated in some type of virtual environment.
Jackson, I mean, when I read an article the other day in the New York Times, and it was the title of the article was COVID-19 Preys on Jews' Biggest Strength. And the Jews' biggest strength, this is where the Enlightenment era hopefully comes in. This is the benefit of a good liberal arts education here. The Jews' biggest strength, as this author put it, and she was Jewish, was the willingness and ability to get together in groups to hold each other up in solidarity. And she said her aunt wanted to go sit Shiva after someone passed away. And there was a gathering of 400 people. And immediately they recognized that wasn't a good idea for the community in this new time. You can't sit with 400 family members in this time. And so it uniquely, from her perspective, attacked and disrupted the culture. And Jackson, in your point, the strength of an organization to hold live events. And when an external event, an exogenous shock, directly threatens your differentiating ability, that's existential, right? That's a significant threat. Some of us, can play through this differently than others. Jeff, anything to add here?
I was just curious, Jackson, if I could ask a quick follow-up, and thank you for being jolly on the spot. That was a cold call, everyone on the podcast. We did not.
I gave him a heads up in the chat. I mean,
but still, pretty eloquent response, and we appreciate it. As you're looking across your clients who are trying to pivot at the moment, I've been starting to gauge as we talk to people who is in survival mode purely, and where people have sort of gone through. Matthew was talking about cycles of change and psychodynamics. They've kind of gotten through, okay, this is happening and we're surviving, to how do we take advantage of this moment? How can we be creative? How can we solution differently? As you think about the portfolio of people you're dealing with, where are they on that spectrum?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the study of psychodynamics has been pretty wild the last 2-3 weeks, obviously. I think obviously those first 2 weeks, just about everyone is in survival mode, including our own organization, where, I think going into COVID-19, we had about 18% of our workforce that was working in a true remote environment. And now we've got 95%. The only people that are still going into the office are the IT folks that are keeping the lights on and keeping us on the rails so that we can operate as a company. So I think that it's taken adjustment and adaptation for us to be able to help our clients. I think that there's still probably 20-30% that are in a little bit of that survival mode. I'm working with a couple of clients right now where we're pitching them some incentive solutions in the channel, and they are on a complete hiring freeze. And we just have to accept that, work with them, and be understanding. I think that some of our clients that are more events based, they were freaking out, obviously, for the first couple of weeks of this, as they started to understand that having a live event in the next 3-4 months is just simply not an option. But now I think that it's been fun to collaborate with them, show them some of the virtual capabilities, the augmented reality that we can bring to the table to help them put on a really strong event. Never ever going to truly replicate what that live event would have been, but we can replicate pieces of that. And so now you've seen a significant shift in probably 40-50% of our clients that are truly event clients for us, to where they're collaborating, they're trying to innovate, they want to figure this thing out on the fly with us, and they want to capitalize in some way on what this environment currently is. So I think to answer your question, it's a mix of both.
Thank you.
I think, Jeff, we only wanted to pick on Jackson and get his opinion because he has the best radio voice ever. Jackson has also done sports commentary and color commentary for Drake Sports over the years. So Jackson, thanks for playing along.
Thank you guys for having me. I intentionally do not have a camera on right now because it's every day is hat day for me these days, and nobody needs to see that. So thank you guys for having me. This is awesome.
Right on. It. Thanks for being part of our community. Really do appreciate it. Kappen, where do we go next?
I saw McKinsey writing to us about the new normal of business. I thought I might go there next and find out what she's seeing. from her storytellers and what's going on.
Mackenzie, what's the story?
So I provide marketing and public relations for businesses. We have a sort of a boutique agency. And what I am seeing is that businesses really are trying to transition to online services and day of life. And this can also be an opportunity for some businesses who are already set up or can transition quickly. So my team put together a digital business checklist to really help people walk through what they can do right now in the moment, what they have control over, because there's so much we don't have control over right now. So just really quickly an overview, and I'd love to share this resource with your podcast listeners. First is just to create and share those online services. So if you can quickly create a digital store, a service, a product offering, sometimes you just need to do some basic training on how do you transition to a Zoom call or workshops. And then really you need to tell people that you're offering these services. Right now there's a lot of confusion about what is open, what's not. Can things be done online? Can things not be done online? And so just really sharing. And then if you are networking, having those webinars, doing a podcast just like this, creating community around the technology so we're still able to socialize while keeping social distance. The second piece is really having that clear, confident communication. So business changes are hard. There's a lot of fear right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think as business leaders, being able to create that sense of calm and saying, we are in a new normal, but we're doing business. We're continuing to serve and lead in our community, in our niche. And that can be something like sending customer-facing emails or newsletters, also making sure that you're communicating confidently with your staff, so they're aware of what you're doing as they're talking to your clients. And then sometimes it's just really transitioning those print resources into a digital offering. So what can you do on social media? Is there a print brochure you can transition to a PDF to help you share those resources? And then the third step is really to invest into your digital tribe. So this is a marketing concept around content creation, really leading with value, leading with leadership, doing something just like this, where you're offering a free resource. You're really helping people in that moment. And I'm seeing a lot of this online, podcasts, webinars, touch bases, just things around like, let's all get together and let me help serve you through this crisis and build that relationship and that value on the front end. And I'm seeing a lot of people do that right now.
Yeah, we've chatted a lot about improv, and I know Ted Hughes is sort of the king of improv. Ted is a CITO professional, and so the ability to be agile, to respond immediately, a perfect example of how one pivots. But Mackenzie, how do people just in that aspect? Listen, we're in a conservative geography, in a conservative industry in many ways, in financial services, a lot of us. How do we develop that muscle memory of improv, of pivoting, of assessing quickly and then responding quickly? How do we protect that? I'll go Mackenzie and then Ted. I'd really love your thoughts because you're leading a team there that is able to pivot quickly, but this is our calm is contagious image, something that we've been putting out. And in order to respond effectively and quickly, you do need to maintain your head. So Mackenzie, and then maybe we'll go to Ted if you're willing.
Yeah, so I would say that probably the most potent thing is that you still are who you are. Just like you said, know thyself. That doesn't change. Your values don't change. Your mission doesn't change in this. If you, financial services, I think about like calm, security, rational decisions. People need that message right now. People are scared. And if you have that leadership in that space, people need to hear from you. So a lot of times it's taking what you already have and just changing the delivery model.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that I also do public relations. So I'm talking with media colleagues, and there's, advertising has really dried up. There's been some publications that are sort of not publishing anymore, or putting things on hold, or really scaling back around the country. And so just really thinking about Facebook a lot of times really is that new paper route, and podcast really is that new radio. And so just thinking through, the message doesn't change, the delivery might shift a little bit, but you still are who you are. So just thinking about just that small shift rather than like a big overhaul.
Yeah. Ted, would love to get you in here if you're willing. What are you seeing? I mean, from an improv, you lead an organization as a technology professional. I always look to technology to model agile response and improv and pivoting. What are you seeing in the field? How are you responding and staying calm at the same time?
Yeah, my thought when you were talking about this kind of leads me to a session I sat in yesterday, and it was just 21 chief information officers across the country, invite only, from Gartner, and we were talking about this, and I think the question before that Jeffrey mentioned, and then kind of leads into this as well. I think that what we're seeing in America on the response of this pandemic is kind of a different mentality than everywhere else, I believe, in the world. And that is, I think that all the companies started from a point of care.
Yeah.
And you didn't see the companies respond with, oh, well, this is going to blow over, or well, I got to worry about my bottom line, or whatever. Everybody that I've talked to from a CIO perspective, their approach was a perspective of take care of X. First was the employee, then it moved on to the customer, then it moved on for us to the agency and distribution force. I think that gets you nimble. If you ultimately have a strategy that can compartmentalize the approach of what you're trying to attack, that becomes nimble by itself, because you have to shift so quickly. I love McKinsey, your 3 bullets, because that, honestly, that's where we're at. We're preaching to the business right now that this is not a problem. This is an opportunity. This is an amazing opportunity for you to pivot. And as senior leaders, we were in a call on Monday, and our CEO made the comment, and I am a 400% behind this, and that is that in adversity, you have an opportunity to refresh your strategy.
Yep.
Why not take it?
Listen, I think what we've been preaching is never let a good crisis go unutilized. A crisis is the perfect opportunity to unfreeze behaviors, reassess the landscape, and then refreeze in our response to that crisis. And my goodness, Ted, distribution will change. I was on a call with some life insurers yesterday, and we were talking about, listen, are you going to have a medical professional walk into folks' home to do testing, after this or during this? Probably not. And we literally were describing joint ventures between life insurers and 23andMe. How do you underwrite, life insurance without medical examinations? And so that's the big type of thinking that some folks are thinking about. And then, the step into taking a joint venture. But I know we have a couple thoughts. We're coming up here to the top of the hour. We'll probably, we envision this. This is, if it lasts an hour, that feels like a meeting. If it lasts a half an hour, maybe we leave folks maybe interested to come back. So we'll probably be no more than 45 minutes. But if folks do need to peel off for an 8 o'clock, we just want to say, first of all, thank you for being here. Our expectation is going to be that we're going to be doing this weekly in a synchronous format, and maybe even bi-weekly in an asynchronous format. So releasing some podcasts that way. But I think one of our main initiatives is to bring together a community that are responding to this together to learn and to hear from one another. So with that, I know Molly Wheeler, I think is queued up with a question. But Jeff, maybe introduce Molly. And Molly, I mean, you're in an interesting position in Chicago dealing with malls. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say before I let her take it away. As you were saying distribution, and I was scanning the people on the call, and I thought one of our favorites, Molly Wheeler, is in an industry that is closed. And I thought I'd ask her to give us a bit of their perspective, focused on a sort of an industry and a segment that really is being hampered by COVID-19. Molly?
Yeah, not a question per se, but yeah, Kappen just wanted me to chime in. And I think what Ted was saying about leading with care is something that like our industry definitely has been trying to do, and just making sure that like we have 170 malls across the country, and those are community hubs for people. Like those are physical spaces where people come together. So that's like, it's over right now. But I think just making sure that we still maintain that as our value proposition. And like after this, I think people are going, well, it's my own personal opinion, people are going to be very interested in coming back and going shopping with friends and their family and checking that out. But right now it's like, what can we do? Can we do like blood donation in the parking lots? Can we do a drive-through farmers market where we've had physical farmers markets before? So like our malls are a lot about national retailers, but they're also about local businesses. So it's just how can we like cultivate those relationships and keep them going during this time. But to talk about like distribution, like a direction that I think malls were going before this and will continue to go full force after this is using like your store as more of a warehouse. And if you order something from American Eagle, it doesn't have to come all the way from California. It can come from Jordan Creek Mall. So we've been talking about, you know, like kind of how do we reel that in and make like a fulfillment center within the mall that can like bring all of that together. And I think this will definitely be a driver to keep that project going and make that happen more, because I think during this time, like people are still ordering online. So even if your physical store is closed, like how can you utilize that space to be like a value add for your company? So I don't know. That was a lot of random thoughts, and it was not
not at all. I think focusing on value proposition and reflecting on it in this moment, how can you deliver the same value in different ways? I think that's key to how companies are going to succeed, and thinking about the mall as a physical asset that was a community center, and how else can it work so that people get what they need. I think that's a key takeaway for pretty much everyone in strategy, is how do you refocus and double down on why you exist, why you do what you do, what is the value you deliver. So thank you for sharing what your 170 properties are trying to do in the crisis.
Whenever we get a call from the media where a mall is pivoting their strategy, where a mall may be re-envisioning what they're going to be for their community, I immediately call Molly Wheeler. She represents malls all over the country, and you know how they re-envision their future in an era that's changing rapidly. Jeff, I do want to bring in Alan Salabasic, and Alan I think is on the East Coast, and maybe also after that we could pivot to Riyadh. I think we're joined from Saudi Arabia with Christiana. But Alan, before we get there, I'd just like to say what you see on your screen is a book about collapse. It's written by an evolutionary biologist named Jared Diamond, and he profiles societies that stick to their commonly held assumptions and values in the face of all reasonable evidence. And so he profiles one society in Scandinavia that loved to eat meat, and they actually recolonized an area of Greenland, and they brought over cows. And then, as we know now, Greenland is a pretty harsh environment. And their culture and their values and the way of their, organizing their society, said, we're going to eat meat and we're not going to eat fish because fish are dirty. And so what happened? The winter came, killed off all the cows. And instead of re-examining what had made them so strong to begin with, which was, a focus and a diet around meat, they decided to, all their cows had died. They did not go, into the abundance of the ocean to eat fish. They decided instead to start eating each other, and the society fully collapsed. And so I think the question, especially in times of rapid change, are what are our perfectly held assumptions or goals or values or ways of doing business that we need to fundamentally question in order to get through this time. Because I don't know about you, Alan, but I do not want to resort to cannibalism. So with that, Alan, what's the view from New York, from Connecticut? From your perspective, Alan is a graduate of Drake, is entering Harvard business MBA, but has been in investments here and asset management for the past number of years. And not only that, he's probably the best tennis player I know. Alan, what do you see from your vantage point?
Well, wow! Thanks for the great introduction, and thank you for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you today, over the screen at least. From what I'm seeing, and I'm sitting in Connecticut. The firm I work for is a small hedge fund that has a pretty broad investment horizon and strategy, in that we try to invest in companies for the long run. So I can speak from our point of view is right now, and I think, for most companies, this is a short-term pain that we don't know how long it will take to get resolved. But in the long run, there are businesses out there that are going to be able to sustain themselves and thrive, some more so than others. And what we're seeing is that across the board, businesses who might be fine in the short term or not are getting slashed in terms of valuation the same way as businesses that might not be fine or get in trouble in the short term. And, there's an opportunity for someone who can, put on the helmet of long-term investor, the hat of long-term investor, and pick through those companies that are going to be fine in the long term, but might experience some short-term gain and see their valuations get cut, to, take advantage of that mispricing. However, it is really tough to stay disciplined in such an environment. When you see the world coming crashing down, how do you stay true to your initial strategy, to your initial values? Do you, you start doubting yourself whether your strategy is the right one. And I think, the time that you spend coming to this point is probably is critical. And you can argue either way, but I would say it's probably more important than what the strategy shift you're trying to make now. I think, the preparation leading up to this. Our firm has had basically the same investment strategy for the last 20 years.
Yeah. And
we decided that we pick our what we are good at, and we let the market oscillate around that. So make our strategy constant, and let market gyrations just direct whether we're seeing opportunities or not. And when you mentioned that example from the book Collapse, that's probably the same pitfall that the people fell into by choosing to stick to their same long-standing values and disregarding or misinterpreting or completely failing to see some bigger issue.
Yeah.
So it's really important to evaluate whether your strategy is still relevant, whether you need to be making a small shift or a big change to it. And at least from our perspective, it's been more of the small tweaks. Try to stay true to your values and try to put on the lens of someone who's looking 5-10 years beyond this.
Because overreaction is also a real risk, right? We always say, this is an image that we find critically important. How do we balance culture, short-term performance, and long-term sustainability simultaneously? That's ambidexterity. How do you compete and execute for the present while simultaneously retaining a long-term view and taking a shifting long-term perspective and use it to inform those short-term decisions? Just absolutely critical. And Alan, I just want to have one more follow-up for you, maybe on a little bit more personal note. You're in the epicenter probably of how things are unfolding in the United States. We always say the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And so for the middle of the country, we look to New York for, a week or two in advance of us. We look to Italy a week or two in advance of New York. And we look to China and potentially, God willing, South Korea as, 4 or 5 weeks in front of New York or us. What are you seeing just personally there on the ground? And then we'll bring it back. Alan?
Sure. I could, the situation in New York City is particularly bad, and that's been publicized in the news. And like even my relatives in Bosnia are talking about that because it's so it's particularly bad, and it's particularly well covered. But 35 miles outside of the city here in Connecticut, it's a drastically different situation. We don't have a formalized, stay-at-home order. It's not a lockdown situation. It's more of a please stay at home, be smart, guidance from our governor, and people are outside running in parks and whatnot. So like there's not even though we're very close to the city and most of us commute in and out of it, just a difference between how people are approaching or realizing how serious the situation is pretty dramatic. It's a big difference. And I have colleagues that live on Manhattan and in Long Island City, and they're afraid to go outside. Here, you put on your jogging shoes at 5 p.m. and you go for a run. It's very, it's different, and it's all, people's response is different based on the context they're in. They see it's nice out. It's not as densely populated. It's not as bad to see a street here be empty as it is in Manhattan. So the context always amplifies response or downgrades it, and there's big dichotomy in response in Connecticut and in New York City, even though they're 40 miles apart.
Yeah. Well, I know we have a few other folks, Dr. Kappen, on the call, but Christiana is looking at us here from a distance, maybe from her hotel room in Riyadh. In Riyadh or Jeddah? Is Saudi?
In Riyadh. Good morning, everyone. In
Riyadh. And also I know we have Rory from Rory. Are you in Louisville? In the Midwest there?
So I actually moved back to Des Moines temporarily to take care of my parents. But yeah, I'm normally in Louisville. Things are doing well there.
Well, love to catch up a little bit later. And we also have Courtney from Vermeer. Courtney, I hope you're doing well, and following the global strategy for Vermeer and a manufacturing facility around the world. Nana, we got you here in Des Moines, always somebody that is staying on top of not only what's going on here, but industries around the world. Christiana, maybe give us an update from your perspective in Saudi, and then I think we probably will want to wrap up after that.
Well, things in Saudi are actually, Saudi Arabia actually went into lockdown very early in the process. So we are on lockdown and curfew from 3 p.m. in the afternoon until 6 a.m. the next morning. So it's an interesting shift. Everyone in terms of the community has come together without real complaints. Everyone's adhering to the regulations because the sentiment here is that the sooner we get rid of it, the sooner we can get back to business. The positive element that I've experienced in the last couple of weeks is with regards to the shift of doing work virtually, especially for a culture, as is the case in the Middle East, where it's very much a meet in person type of culture. And now the circumstances are actually forcing them to work virtually. And I feel that will bring a lot of benefit going forward, and enabling business to be done in a very different way. So right now the strategy here is harsh lockdown so that, the quicker we deal with it, the quicker we can get back to business. And it's actually paid off. Like in Riyadh, for example, before curfew was imposed 2 weeks ago, we had about 50 new cases a day, and we've dropped down to 7 yesterday. And it's been like a gradual drop down in numbers and new cases every single day. The cities are actually individually on lockdown, so you can't move from one city to another. So while it may sound a little bit intimidating in terms of freedom of movement, right now, no one's moving and everyone's happy not to be moving, if you know what I mean. So looking forward to having a little bit of normality here, starting to emerge over the next week or so. We do anticipate that if in the coming, I was speaking to someone from a government entity actually this morning, and he was telling me that, if the numbers continue to decrease and we get a few consecutive days with 0 new cases for Riyadh, the anticipation is that each respective city will start to reopen for business, slowly but surely. So
Wow.
That's kind of where we are right now.
Wow. Well, if that is part of our future in the United States, that is somewhat encouraging. And yet we always know with pandemics, there's a second and third wave. And how do you manage normal through those waves? Listen, I'll turn it over to Kappen. We are here at 8:15, 8:17, and we want to make sure that we don't monopolize your time. But Kappen?
Yeah, I think first, thank you for everyone for joining, coming to the very first Bâton Salon. And Christiana, thank you for making the last observation global. I don't know if Christiana introduced herself, but she represents Bâton in the Middle East and the Mediterranean and the Balkans. And she has had a roller coaster of a ride weathering the virus in Saudi Arabia. I think just by way of closing, I think a message that we can take out of everything that we heard today, one, it is a serious situation. It is an exogenous shock. The world economy is in a crisis moment. But that also gives us opportunities for innovation, the chance to reflect on value propositions, re-examine our whys, and as Mitchell alluded to, not waste a good crisis. As we can think about ways to do things differently or prepare ourselves for the next wave of growth and what we hope will be a swift recovery after the crisis is over. We're hoping that some of the fundamentals that were good beforehand will rapidly return, and sooner or later we'll all be gathering at one of Molly's properties for a coffee and have our salon in person as they used to be during the original Enlightenment events. So with that, I think that's kind of my closing thought and a message for us to take away as we go into our Friday, and maybe something to reflect upon over the weekend.
Dr. Kappen, thank you. As I think about this and as we chat with folks, the message and story also comes to me about Hansel and Gretel. And Hansel and Gretel is a story where their mother and father had to make some very, very difficult decisions in a time of scarcity. Their mother and father said, infanticide was fairly common at that time. And they said, we don't have enough food to feed our family. And so they walked Hansel and Gretel out into the woods and left them. And as I think about that, I think about with my clients, my students, and definitely my own children, we probably haven't known scarcity the way Hansel and Gretel's family knows scarcity and had to make very, very difficult decisions. But in this time, I like to call these crucible moments. And these crucible moments of great opportunity or great crisis or great change, that's when we make decisions that are going to affect ourselves and others for the rest of our lives. And I just think about all of you walking through this time together. And I just would extend our hand and solidarity with you as you're making decisions that are going to affect you and those around you for the rest of your life. And I appreciate your willingness to be here with us in this time to walk through this time together. So with that, Carter has gratefully provided some closing things, just details. I will tell you, this will be available on all your podcast streams at some point. We hope to do this every Friday. And if there's a need or an interesting topic that you'd like to share, please let us know. Feel free to email us or hit us up on LinkedIn or Twitter. Suggest those ideas. We mostly discussed strategy today. Maybe we can save self-care and resilience and sustainability for another time. So with that, we'll go ahead and sign off here. Be careful, take care, be well, rest well. And as we always like to remember, just hashtag calm is contagious. Let's respond with a mentality and a mindset of preparedness, not panic. Take care, folks.